Namaskar and thank you for tuning in to the Economic Brief, the weekly economy-related current affairs program from an Indian point of view. I'm Mark Lynn and this is DD India. On the show, there's a big boost in production-linked incentives as India moves manufacturing up a gear. Concern over the Trump tariffs is taking effect. Now we look at short-term as well as medium-term expectations. Arab leaders back Egypt's $53 billion Gaza reconstruction proposal, which challenges Trump's plan to turn the enclave into a Middle East Riviera. Now, resilient supply chains are key to achieving manufacturing excellence. India is emerging as a key player in the global supply chains as well. DD India's correspondent Tapas Bhattacharya, in fact, caught up with Deepak Shetty, who's the chairman of the CII Council on Manufacturing Excellence, to understand what's being done to lift India's manufacturing sector. Let's listen.
I think for years together, the Indian economy was supported by the services sector. The manufacturing sector is now coming to play, as you rightly said. And one of the key reasons is the various policies that the honorable government has announced, which are very conducive for the manufacturing sector, whether it is through the PLI schemes, which is encouraging more of FDA and also encouraging Indian entrepreneurs to get into manufacturing. The ease of doing business is again playing a very important role. And also the various announcements that have been made as a part of our budget. This year, during the budget, the Honorable Finance Minister made announcements on supporting the MSME sector. And we have seen globally the manufacturing sector has grown based on the support and the growth in the MSME sector.
Well, let's try and understand a little bit about the manufacturing sector and the production-linked incentives that are being given to the manufacturing sector, which have got a significant boost in the 2025-26 budget. Coming up behind me are some figures. Production-linked incentive scheme is aimed at boosting manufacturing, that's understood, but it's also to improve domestic and global competitiveness and attract investment in high-tech industries. The goal is to improve, as we said, competitiveness, establish India as a global manufacturing powerhouse. By strengthening domestic manufacturing, that is. So the PLI stands for production-linked incentives. The scheme focuses on 14 key sectors, and some of them are pharmaceuticals, telecom, but mostly in the high-tech space. Financial incentives are also linked because they are linked obviously to the production or the higher production as well as incremental sales, because that obviously is the incentive for the industry as well as to see that it's continuing to grow. But let's look at some of the allocations then that are going into this sector. We are seeing that there's plenty of allocations. The increase in allocations in the production-linked incentive schemes as per the 2025-26 budget. Hopefully these figures will come up right now. As we can see, electronics and IT hardware. I think this is a key sector because this is an area with the future. And we are seeing from 5,777 crores, it's now moved to 9,000 crores, a significant jump in the total given there. And automobiles, in fact, is moved from 346 to about 2,818. India has a significant, about 85 companies are approved for incentives in the auto sector. And we are seeing that a lot of FDI is also coming in electronics and IT hardware. India has in fact moved from being a net importer of mobile phones to being a net exporter of mobile phones. Pharmaceuticals is also a big deal because India is now producing high-tech equipment for the medical industry. MRI machines, all those CT scanners and things like that are also being produced within India itself. The textile sector also, we can see, is being given a significant boost because this is a sector that India can contribute in a large way to the export market. So this, we can see, is some of the key sectors involved in this industry. Before we move on, we can also try and understand what the Minister for External Affairs has said regarding India-US trade, because we understand that tariffs are going to change things, but whether India is prepared for it, is India in negotiations to try and get a good deal out of the United States? Let's listen to what the External Affairs Minister said.
if I were to look at some of the big priorities of this president, many of them actually work for us. He seems to be, for example, committed to keeping energy prices reasonably affordable and stable. We welcome that. He is putting a lot of emphasis on tech. I think that offers a lot of possibilities, for us. He has a certain view of trade. We had a very open conversation about it. And the result of that conversation was that we agreed on the need for a bilateral trade agreement. And our trade minister, in fact, is there in Washington doing exactly that right now.
Indeed. Dr. Nilanjan Banik, senior economist, professor at Mahindra University, is with us. He's going to help us understand what's happening both in our manufacturing sector as well as in the United States. But first, let's talk about the manufacturing sector. Dr. Banik, how much of manufacturing can actually be driven by these production-linked incentives when at the end of the day, the bottom line is actually competing with costs, and we find that manufacturing is probably cheaper in China?
Yeah, this is an interesting experiment that India need to do, because if you see in terms of the contribution of manufacturing sector to our national income, it was more or less remaining constant over the last 50 years. And manufacturing sector is very important from the perspective of generating employment. In particular, if I'm talking about MSME type of manufacturing. Now, if you see the allocation, which is a very welcome move, I was looking at the numbers that you're showing. Government has almost double the amount that is meant for the PLI sector or the PLI scheme. But even then, just to put into perspective, we are talking about 16,000 crore rupees being allocated towards the PLI scheme. And if I try to compare that with the amount of subsidy which is given to the agricultural sector, the amount of subsidy given to the agricultural sector is around 1,22,000 crore of rupees. So in a way, we are talking about less than 8% of the subsidy that the government is giving towards the PLI scheme. Okay. Now, I said that this is a very welcome move because in terms of numbers, this number has actually doubled, because earlier this number was around less than 8,000 crore. Now it has touched almost 16,000 crore. And we are going to see some benefit of this, because if you see in terms of the manufacture of smartphones in India, we have now become one of the global leader of smartphones in India. Most of the Apple iPhone are now being manufactured in India, and they are exported to the rest of the world. Indeed. I also think that this is a very good way to give signal to the foreign manufacturing companies who are actually trying to relocate their production base from China to elsewhere. Because if the government is giving incentive in the form of PLI scheme, you are actually sending a signal to the foreign manufacturing companies that, hey, you can come and start manufacturing in India. And in terms of the allocation, I see a big allocation has been given towards the automobile and automobile sector and the automotive component sector. Now, automotive component sector is the one where you see most of the small and marginal enterprises are operating. And these are also the place
big employment
which are
generators,
into the labor-intensive mode of production. True, so absolutely. I see a great amount of jobs getting created. I also see a big amount of money is being allocated towards the textile sector, which is again into the labor-intensive mode of production. And that is also going to have some good impact. Now, also, please remember, in terms of the high-tech industry that you are mentioning, for instance, semiconductor, or for instance, medical devices, or for instance, let's say automobile, this PLI scheme actually is going to help in terms of India getting access to cutting-edge technology. Because at the end of the day, the way technology is changing, we need to have access to the cutting-edge technology. And this PLI scheme is a signal
Yes.
through which we are actually trying to welcome the foreign
Yes, Dr.
manufacturers
Banik.
to
If I may
come
come
and
in
set
there,
up.
Dr. Banik, you know, if you look at designing also and innovation, these needed to be improved after all for manufacturing to be truly domestic in that sense. Because at the end of the day, you know, assembling is not really quite manufacturing, and a lot of the units are basically dependent on supply chains which are global. So in this context, what do you think really needs to be done to improve our own strengths in terms of design, R&D and everything, making the product truly Atmanirbhar?
No, that is very much needed. As I said, that you have to start from somewhere. Because if I look into the amount allocated for the PLI scheme as a percentage of GDP, it is still less than 1% of the GDP, right? But the signal is very much important that earlier India was not considered to be that business friendly when it comes to the foreign manufacturing units coming and set up their companies in India. But just by signaling that we are welcoming companies like Foxconn, Pegatron, Wistron, you know. In fact, Tata, some of our domestic companies are actually buying off this foreign Taiwanese company like Pegatron. Tata has bought 60% of the stake.
Sure.
Wistron, Tata totally have bought the company. So in a way, some of the technology which was earlier not available through this FDI, which these companies are bringing in India, our domestic companies are able to take care or take advantage of the technology which was earlier not there in India. So in that way, I think this is a very good move because the government is trying to give incentive to the manufacturing sector.
Yes.
And as you correctly mentioned, that manufacturing sector, the way automation is happening, it is very important for us to get access to cutting edge technology. So in
right.
that way, what we see in terms of allocation of incentive towards automotive industry, towards semiconductor industry will help our domestic manufacturer get access to the cutting edge technology
Indeed,
that
Dr.
we are
Banik,
talking about.
a final question in this segment is, you know, the circular economy, of course, is coming into focus. We're talking about moving towards net zero. We, of course, have the target to reach there by 2070. But it is in focus, and we have to create products that are basically zero effect and zero defect and will be part of the circular economy. To what extent should these kind of products be incentivized by PLI?
Yeah, because as we move, CSG or sustainable development thing is becoming more and more important, both from the perspective of restoring the climate that we are seeing, that we are living in, and at the same time, you are trying to ensure that the amount of waste that is getting generated, you are some way able to use those, in this case, the electronic waste, you know. So again, in terms of the narrative of how the business are being done, we are seeing increasingly business are getting focused in terms of ensuring that not too much of climate is getting damaged, not too much of other issues. For instance,
Yes.
usage of child labors. For instance, usage of, let's say, they are also bringing in gender disparity in terms of the product or in terms of the carbon emission. You know, in some cases, let's say when we are talking about the fossil fuel, you know, the amount of carbon that is getting emanated from this kind of industry is causing harm and actually creating this global warming. So in all those perspectives, we have to be cognizant of the fact that whenever we are doing the manufacturing, not only the technology is important,
Right.
but at the same
Absolutely.
time, you are trying to produce the product so that you are actually able to use the byproduct of those manufacturing process. At the same time, keeping a tap on the amount of carbon
Right.
monoxide
Absolutely.
or carbon dioxide
We
type
leave
of
it. We
gas,
leave the.
which
We leave.
is
Yeah.
against the greenhouse.
We leave this topic for the moment, Dr. Banik. Stay with us. So let's move on to our next topic, which is the U.S. tariffs and its impact. Now, the U.S. President Trump's trade policies, they are supposed to rebuild U.S. industries and small businesses, is what he says, by imposing these tariffs on imports from major trading partners, Canada, Mexico, and China. Now, the goal is to make American products more competitive, to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States, to reduce the trade deficit. However, the early days seem to suggest that these actions could lead to supply chain disruptions, market volatility, and potential slowdowns in global economic growth. International trade faces potential disruption as 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico and 20% on China affect U.S. imports worth over $1.3 trillion annually. These tariffs might temporarily shield domestic manufacturers and promote American-made products, but they also present significant challenges.
So estimates suggest that the 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico will increase prices for Americans by about $1,200 per household. That's a $1,200 decrease in annual income per every American household.
Tariffs raise input costs for American manufacturers, decreasing competitiveness and profitability. The US president is confident that retaliatory measures have inherent limitations.
Well, I can't say. It depends on what they do with their currency. It depends on what they do in terms of a retaliation with some kind of an economic retaliation, which I don't think they're going to retaliate too much.
Canada may cut off energy exports to the United States in retaliation. The US relies on Canada for 98% of its natural gas and 93% of its electricity. Americans might pay $1,200 more annually, while Canadians and Mexicans could face $1,900 in extra costs. Tariffs raise costs for Mexican vehicle and agricultural exports into the United States. They also disrupt supply chains and production schedules. However, Chinese analysts believe their economy has adjusted.
Because China has diversified its export destinations, we have long been prepared for a shift in trade partners, such as those in Southeast Asia and BRICS countries. In this regard, there has been a successful transition in export destinations.
China predicts a temporary impact as markets will seek quality at the best price. In the end, the US economy must become more competitive rather than more protectionist. Tariffs may benefit US manufacturers short term, but the overall effect hinges on business adaptation and whether increased demand outweighs higher costs and supply chain disruptions. The Economic Brief, DD India. Dr. Banik continues to be with us. Dr. Banik, Trump has already put on hold the auto components part, from Mexico and Canada. So that's not going to be taxed. Is it possible, to exempt raw materials while still taxing the finished product?
So what is happening with respect to Mexico and Canada? You see that most of the items which was exported from Mexico to the US were actually getting originated from China. So what China was doing, because China was getting targeted, so they moved their production base mostly to the North American countries. In particular, if I'm talking about automobile manufacturing giant like BYD or even Chery, you will find that most of their automobile components are now getting manufactured in Mexico. So basically, they are changing the rules of origin just to divert the tariff which was earlier being imposed on the Chinese automobile products.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Trump somehow have realized this happening. And therefore, what you see at this point of time, Trump has equally imposed tariff both on Mexico and Canada. So in that way, Chinese are now going to have a tough time in terms of exporting their automobile components to the US mainland. The other thing you will notice, if I look into the import data, now once Trump was elected, most of the American importers, they actually front-loaded their import. So there is a big spike in the import, monthly import data, in particular during December and January, which suggests that they were somehow foreseeing this tariff will be being imposed by the US president. And therefore, they front loaded, and there is a big spike in the import data, in particular items like furnitures, travel goods, apparel, which actually comes from China. So in that
Yes.
way, Trump is trying to ensure that even if Chinese companies they shift their production base, no matter where they are shipping their product from, it will come under the tariff.
Okay. Well, he has actually put the auto components on hold because the US manufacturing needed that for the moment, at least for 1 month. But you know, India also has a trade surplus with the United States. And as our External Affairs Minister said that, you know, we are negotiating a deal. So to what extent do you think this can be made more balanced? Because that's what the US is trying to look at. They're trying to balance trade as much as possible with all the countries they have trade deficits with.
I don't think India is going to suffer that much when it comes to our exports. Because if I look into the major trade items that India exports to the US, these are refined petroleum product, these are pharmaceutical product, these are gems and jewelry, and the other products are like textile and apparel. So in total, out of all these five major tradable items, Mr. Trump was mentioning about the pharmaceutical product. Now, again, if I look into the trade component, India's trade component with US as a percentage of India's GDP, it is less than 2%. And if I again reconsider the fact that out of these five main items, Trump was mentioning only about pharmaceutical, we are basically talking about less than 0.5% of the total trade items which is going from India to the US.
Okay.
So in that way, I think there is a lot of headroom for us to negotiate. My fear is in a different way, which is if Trump is taking a more aggressive stance and saying that you need to bring down your automotive or tariff on automobile. Some of our industry, domestic industry, particularly like Mahindra, Maruti, or domestic automobile manufacturing sectors like Tata's, they are going to get impacted if there is a drastic reduction of tariff on automobile items.
Okay.
But because India stand in a
Yes.
way that Trump is only talking
Right.
about few
Yes.
items of interest to India, which we are exporting
True.
to the US. I don't think
We are running short of
India
time,
is going to lose
Professor
out
Banik. So a
much.
quick last question, which is, I mean, the basic worry that many analysts had is that could these Trump tariffs end up pulling the US economy down actually into a recession?
Yes, because what is tariff? Basically, you are taxing trade. So if I take out the trade component from the GDP, what has happened is the US GDP is going to slow down. And interestingly, you will find that during the period of Barack Obama, when he was in power, the trade deficit between US and China, the annual average trade deficit was in the range of 311 billion US dollar.
Okay.
Once Trump took over with all his tariff aggressive stance of imposing tariff, in spite of tariff being imposed, this average annual trade deficit between US and China shot up from 310 billion US dollar to 360 billion US dollar.
Okay.
And it actually came down during the time of Joe Biden. So this is basically suggesting that no matter what, even if you're imposing tariff, you're not going to keep a control tab
Okay.
on your trade deficit.
I'm afraid
And
we-
also there is going to be a job loss because recent data suggests because
But
of Trump
it
imposing
is early
tariff on
days.
the
We'll have
Chinese
to see how it
multinational.
plays out. I mean, it is just a plan so far, and I mean, these are all forecasts. So we'll have to leave it there at the moment. But thank you for putting it into perspective for us, Dr. Nilanjan Banik, senior economist with Mahindra University in Hyderabad. Thanks for being with us. Now, well, Arab leaders have backed Egypt's $53 billion Gaza reconstruction proposal, which challenges Trump's plan for U.S. ownership of the enclave. This is our last report. We leave it with you, this report. Thanks very much for watching the Economic Brief this week. Namaskar.
A month after US President Donald Trump floated his plan to depopulate Gaza and turn the enclave into the Riviera of the Middle East, Arab leaders have adopted a rival proposal by Egypt. The $53 billion Egyptian plan, which has been welcomed by Arab leaders, Hamas, and the Palestinian Authority, has been rejected by the United States and Israel over doubts over Hamas's involvement. The plan aims to rebuild Gaza by 2030 without removing its population. The first phase would entail removal of unexploded ordnance and clearing more than 50 million tons of debris. Hundreds of thousands of temporary housing units will be built to house Gaza's population while reconstruction takes place. Structures would include sustainable urban areas and an airport. Notably, this will all be done under an interim administration run by technocrats in preparation for the return of the Palestinian Authority to Gaza.
Egypt worked on training Palestinian security cadres who will assume the task of maintaining security within the Strip during the next phase. Egypt cooperated with the sisterly state of Palestine and international institutions to develop a comprehensive and integrated plan to rebuild the Gaza Strip without displacing Palestinians.
This is much in contrast to Trump's Gaza plan, in which he has suggested US ownership of the enclave. He proposed resettlement of Gaza's over 2 million residents, while Washington turns the enclave into Middle East Riviera, which is a famous coastal tourist destination in Europe. Trump even shared an AI-generated video of his vision. Welcomed by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the plan was widely slammed by Arab leaders. While Egypt's plan has been favored by the Arab nations, it would need inflow of funds to see any progress. The Economic Brief, DD India.